AQA GCSE English Literature Grade 9 Jekyll and Hyde exemplar essay. So I made this video from a suggested comment, so feel free to comment any video suggestions that you want. In this video we'll look at timings, assessment objectives, mark scheme, do you need an intro and conclusion, my grade 8 and 9 approach to the question, and my grade 9 exemplar essay broken down. So, in terms of timings, you should spend roughly 25 to 30 minutes answering this 30 marker, and you're expected to write between 3 to 4 paragraphs. Here are the assessment objectives, and you can see how I've used them. So, you've got AO1, AO2, and AO3. So, AO1 is practically just being able to make points, and AO2 is practically using evidence and looking at the methods used, and AO3 is looking at context. So you can see in this example paragraph that I have highlighted the 3 AOs in this paragraph. So the writer uses settings to convey the theme of duality in the novel, etc., etc. So we'll go through the essay soon, but blue is AO1, red is AO2, and green is AO3. Now let's look at the mark scheme. So you should always be looking at the top of the mark scheme. Now grade 8 and 9 answers in the level are the 26 to 30 marks out of 30, and this is the level 6. So they're split up into A1, AO1, AO2, and AO3. So it shows how you need to put all 3 points. And I'm just going to read out that at the top of the level, a candidate's response is likely to be a critical, exploratory, well-structured argument. It takes a conceptualized approach to the full task, supported by a range of judicious references. There will be a fine-grained and insightful analysis of language and form and structure, supported by judicious use of subject terminology. So, if you're wondering, judicious just means perfectly chosen. So, really good chosen evidence, not a lot, but a small amount, but really well supporting of your points. And also, another key thing is convincing exploration. It has to convince the examiner. If the examiner isn't convinced, then it is not a good response. And finally, just looking at this table. So, what makes a good answer and what makes a better answer? So, a good answer is something that has clear points, whereas a better answer is something that has points which link to the question and make more deep and detailed comments, such as 2 levels of interpretation. And in terms of comparing AO2, a good answer explains the meaning of quotes and explains the writer's intended effect and zooms in on keywords and quotes. In a better answer, you write in more detail about the effect of the quotes and you weave the relevant context into the analysis rather than just adding it at the end of a paragraph. So that's really a really good tip for exams. Do not just shove all of the context at the bottom of the paragraph because it's just showing to the examiner that it's almost a tick box exercise. Really, you want to show how you're combining all your skills through your really thoughtful analysis. And instead of just adding it on, really thoughtfully thinking where should context improve their answer and placing it there. And whereas a good answer only just mentions some context that links. Another thing is that a better answer explores multiple interpretations and there's multiple examples of context, not just a single. Now let's answer the question, do you need an introduction or a conclusion? Now, you don't have to, especially in terms of an introduction. Introductions are definitely not necessary because if you're writing with tough time constraints, you should just be focusing on the bulk of your answer, which are the 3 to 4 paragraphs. However, in terms of a conclusion, definitely try to have time to put into the conclusion. Because it can add structure, direction to your response, the introduction can broadly hint at the 3 main points, and the conclusion can reflect on what the writer was trying to do and their overall approach. Now let's go through the response. So, in the novel, Stevenson presents Hyde as a frightening Gothic monster. As a creation of science, Hyde is frightened because he represents the potential danger of scientific experimentation in the Victorian period. Whilst, as part of Dr. Jekyll, Hyde is frightening because he represents the primitive, uncivilized animal nature of humans, something which was a new and disturbing concept to Victorians after Darwin's theory of evolution was released. And it was overturned the traditional biblical worldview of their highly religious society. Throughout the novel, Stevenson uses animalistic imagery, Gothic tropes, and a semantic field of hellish imagery to present Hyde in order to create an extremely frightening character to readers. So, this is the introduction, and this is what students actually tend to do towards the end. By putting at the end, you can see here throughout the novel, Stevenson uses point 1, point 2, and point 3. Now, this isn't necessary, and examiners actually prefer it if you don't do that because you do not have to be forced to outline the 3 points. Instead, I would say just deal with the main theme of whatever the question is. Now, a really good thing about the introduction here is that the whoever has written this has talked really nicely about context, and that just means that instead of just clunking it at the bottom, by putting it in the introduction, it shows the examiner the level of work that you're producing and the quality. So the paragraph 1 begins firstly in this extract. Mr. Hyde is presented as animalistic and the embodiment of evil when he shrank back with a hissing intake of breath, but his fear was only momentary. So, nice use of embedded quotes there. This reveals that Mr. Hyde felt fear, and his reaction to it was to hiss and shrink away like a frightened animal. Now, the use of the simile in just the writer's the student's work like a frightened animal, this provides that extra sense of detail that's helped the student do really well. Now, the writer is presenting Mr. Hyde as animalistic in order to suggest his uncivilized and wild nature, which leads him to be dangerous and uncontrollable character, committing horrendous acts of violence throughout the novel. So this is what I mean when I say a top level response. When you're revising the text, a thing I recommend you do absolutely is draw a word map of writing down different characters and writing down all of the high level language and high level adjectives that you would use to describe them so that you can easily it comes to your mind when you're writing exams, such as dangerous, uncontrollable, horrendous acts of violence. These aren't things that you just thought of in the moment, the student. It's more things that you've looked at and you've said repeatedly in your practices. And that's why I suggest doing that activity. In the Victorian period, this presentation of Hyde would be very frightening to the reader because the concept of evolution was very new and distressing to them. Darwin's theory forced Victorians to confront the idea that we all had the potential to be wild and uncivilized within us because we are evolved from animals. Now, this is a really developed point, it's really scientific. It depends whether or not the examiner would agree and finds it convincing. But if the examiner does find it convincing, I would say it's quite well observed. And this novel uses that unpleasant concept to create fear about the possibilities if that wild side were to be prominent. Furthermore, this word is really good, furthermore, the verb hissing is not just animalistic, but has connotations of snakes in particular, which are often associated with the devil. This suggests that Mr. Hyde is being presented as devilish and evil. In the novel as a whole, now this is a really good phrase here, because first you talked about in this extract, and now you're mentioning in the novel as a whole. So you're literally pointing out to the examiner, look, this is where I should get a mark, this is where I should get a mark, etc. Stevenson uses a semantic field of hellish, devil imagery to present Mr. Hyde as Satan's signature, and the simile, really like Satan, supports its interpretation. Okay? Now, again, context in the Victorian era, very highly religious society. So, really good paragraph here. I would only say, as possibly an improvement, to use more quotes because there seems to be a single quote for this entire paragraph. I would say try to use at least 2 quotes per paragraph. Now, secondly, in this extract, Hyde is presented as secretive and mysterious character, which aligns with the Gothic genre. So, what the student has shown here is that the student has taken what annotations of Hyde and linked it to a genre. So that's really good, especially for the point. For example, Mr. Hyde blowing in the key, and then suddenly, but without looking up, how did you know me? This suggests that Mr. Hyde is on his guard and concerned by Utterson's approaching him, which furthermore implies that he has something to hide. This is typically Gothic, as mystery and secrecy are well known Gothic tropes. Hyde's direct question reveals that he is suspicious about how Mr. Utterson was able to identify him, and suggests he is potentially concerned that he can be so easily found. So I would say that this is a bit retelling the story. That's why it's a bit wordy. So you don't feel like you have to do this. Try and focus on literally analysing everything instead of retelling. Additionally, the fact that he speaks without looking up suggests he is secretive and private character. The symbolism of the locked door, referenced by the key in this description, furthermore emphasizes on the fact that Hyde is private, secretive, and hides away. That's really good, because the fact that the student has realized there is a locked door without them even mentioning it in the quote, that's a second level quote analysis, which is epic. Structurally occurring in chapter 2, so through the word structurally, it's guiding the examiner, saying, okay, you're talking about structure as well, because when we looked at what makes a better answer, structure was definitely one of the points. Talking about speech there, Hyde's speech behaviour created a sense of mystery for readers who become more intrigued about what he is hiding. So hopefully you can see this continue. Feel free to take some notes of this really great response. You can see that the student has included a conclusion here. Clearly the student has had a lot more time, or at least a lot more practice with writing like this. So good luck, and hopefully you can use something. Now, if you want a grade 9 in French, English literature, English language, religious studies, geography, computing, or the other subjects, then why not subscribe to Noel for GCSE? You won't regret it. Have a good time revising. I hope you enjoyed this video and find it useful. Good luck for your exams, and see you soon.